Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for another build. Now this build today is going to be using the new Hercules set we got in the premium shop this week. So it's like the archway, the bench and the statue, and I wanted to keep this space in my glittering dunes for this build. I've been waiting for these items to come so I could put them in here because I feel like this is just such a good spot to have kind of like an ancient Roman kind of themed area. So that's what I'm going to be building today. I kind of had to figure out how I wanted to do the layout as I went along, but I actually am really happy with how it turned out. So let's get started. So to start off with, I obviously placed in the new items just to get a good idea of the kind of layout I wanted to do. I knew that these kind of new items wouldn't fill the whole space because it is quite a big area in this biome. So I just went in and kind of placed them in the design that I'd already thought about it. I did look up pictures of kind of the landscaping in Hercules. I haven't seen it in a long time. So I did look up some pictures and kind of tried to map out what I was doing based around kind of scenes from the movie. Obviously, a lot of the ones I looked at were in more kind of green grassy areas. However, I just feel like the kind of layout of this area in the dunes just works really well. The colours match really beautifully with the items. Not to mention the bridge you come over to get to this area is a very similar kind of like sandstony rock. It just really looked quite similar, so I felt like this was just a good spot to have them in. Personally, you could also do this build in kind of like a nice grassy area. I feel like it would work really well in the jungle or in the forest, so I just went for the desert for my build just because I felt like it fit really well with the vibe I was going for. So I did just go in and map in everything I wanted to use. I didn't have a very big idea of what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do 2 different sections, so I kind of mapped in where I wanted that to go, but apart from that I didn't really have a big plan in mind. So I did just kind of go with it, see what I felt worked well, and kind of just let my creativity flow during the build. To start off with, I did place out everything I knew I'd probably want to use. I did go to Scrooge's before the build and bought everything that I knew I kind of wanted to have in each area. So I did have majority. I did have to go back during the build to buy more things and add more things to the list, but I did get majority of what I wanted. So I did start placing those out. I always find that a really good tip if you're struggling with what to use in your build is I collect all the items beforehand that I think will work in the design I have in mind, and then I will place them all out so I can then rearrange them and see where they work best. Now in here I was debating what kind of lighting to use, whether I should use kind of like a desert themed lighting or if I should go for something kind of more royal and fancy, and I actually decided to go with some of the gold designed lights. I just felt like they kind of brought that extra bit of kind of royalty to it and it just looked a bit more natural. I feel like the kind of desert or beach style lights just didn't really work, so I started dotting those around where I wanted them before I rearranged kind of this little courtyard area where I decided to make kind of like a little recreational area, which I do go through later and kind of explain my reasoning behind each little bit. But I started to rearrange the items I knew I wanted to use here and kind of decorated around it. After this, I went in with some pathway. I went for the ancient pathway. I tend to use this pretty much ever. I think I've used it in my entire desert to this point. I can't lie, just because I love how the gaps in the pathway, you can see the sand through it, so it just looks like this really lovely pathway. I think it just works really well in here. So I have gone in with that again. I was going to use the lighter sandstone pathway, the one from the base game, but I tested it out beforehand. It just didn't really work. It kind of just blended into all the furniture and blended into everything so that it wasn't that noticeable, if that makes sense. It just didn't really work. So I ended up going for this darker pathway, as I felt like it just looked a lot more rustic and kind of old school and ancient. So that is the one I went for, and I started mapping out how I wanted that to go, how I wanted to lead the pathway round, as well as covered the whole kind of main grand courtyard area. I covered the whole thing in pathway, as I wanted it to look like you'd kind of got into this central area and it was all very covered over rather than kind of the natural ground. As you can see, I went off to Scrooge and bought the last few items I needed, because I needed some of the extra waterfalls to go at the back of this kind of recreational area, as well as some more stuff to pop on the tables. I was going to make these tables be like food tables or kind of like a food seating area, but actually once I started looking at the items I had, I felt like it just would have made more sense to make it like kind of just a astrological kind of educational area where they have their scrolls and their maps and all of that kind of stuff. I just felt like it just worked really well. I tend to do food tables in a lot of biomes, and I kind of wanted to do something different this time around, so I decided to go for that kind of look, and then I kept placing around this area all the items I wanted to fit in. I did have to go in and craft some more pathway because I use this pathway so much I just ran out. So I did then make some more, and I continued my pathways all around the biome. Now I wanted to do obviously this main central pathway getting you into the main area and past the kind of rec area, but I also wanted to do pathways leading up to the kind of secret areas in the back, which I go in and decorate more later, and I kind of will talk through what my thought was behind those. But I also did pathways to kind of lead out of the exits of this area of the biome, because there's quite a few exits in here. Like there's one going to the jungle, one going to kind of like a secret underground area, and also one's going up into kind of towards the castle. So I knew there would be a lot of different pathways to kind of map in. Now for foliage in here, I did want to keep it very desert-like. However, in this kind of main area of the courtyard, I felt like the ancient trees worked so perfectly. They just looked great. So my plan then was to do this kind of main courtyard area to have the atmosphere of that it's very looked after, and it's got these kind of ancient, majestic trees that have been here for a long time. They're really well looked after. They're kind of holy, do you know what I mean? I wanted it to kind of feel like they would really appreciate this area and want to keep it really grown and looked after and very bright and colourful, whereas the areas on the outskirts of the temple kind of tucked behind, which are kind of these little secret areas I was building, I wanted them to kind of have a bit more of a deserty feel, as if these areas aren't as looked after. They kind of don't really pay attention to these as much. So my kind of atmosphere with that was to try and make it look as though this biome is a lot bigger than it actually is. So I kind of wanted to imagine it as if this grand courtyard is huge and you can like obviously fit hundreds and hundreds of people in here, but then these outskirts are kind of like the rest of the land that's not as looked after, not as maintained, and a bit more barren. And that was the atmosphere I was going for. Obviously in a biome this small it is kind of hard to do that because you can only make it look so far away, so it was kind of hard to achieve that balance without it looking a bit odd. But in my mind I just was happy with that kind of plan in my head and that look to go for. Obviously I know it won't be everyone's cup of tea because they'll be thinking, why have you got desert things but then you've also got these like really lush ancient trees? But in my kind of thought of what I wanted to do here, I just felt like it made a lot of sense that this kind of grand courtyard would be very kind of looked after and clean and bright, yet these outer areas will be kind of left to their own devices to kind of overgrow with foliage and cacti and all these things. So that is what I was thinking when I went in and started placing everything around. Now speaking of these two separate areas on the left and right hand side, as you'll see as I'm going through, one of them has got a main pathway and one has got a rock pathway, just to keep it different and change it up a bit. And throughout these pathways there are different statues. Now in the game we don't have a huge amount of statues, so I kind of had to use the ones we have got, and I would love to add to this in the future when we do get more statues, but I wanted to do it so that it looked as though these were kind of ancient statues that had kind of been discovered and found in these areas, and you would kind of walk through this area and you would go and view them all. Like I've been on holidays before in places where you do see all these really ancient sculptures that have kind of been preserved and left exactly where they are, they haven't been moved, and you kind of wander through and you discover all the different ones and you kind of read up where they're from and things like that. That was the kind of vibe I was going for in here. I wanted it to feel very much like all of these beautiful artworks and statues had been kind of kept in these areas for people to wander through and have a look at. So I would love to be able to get some more statues in the game at some point that we can I can add to this and make it a bit more in depth. But for now I had to just use the limited statues we have in the game because we don't have that many. But I think I managed to achieve the kind of look I was going for despite that. Now I wanted the foliage in this biome to be kind of bright, even though despite it's a desert, I did want it to have kind of pockets of life. So I did use a lot of the base game bushes as well as the kind of bright greens and things like that. I did use a couple that were different colours just to make it seem quite majestic, but I wanted to go mainly for the greens and the bright colours just because I wanted it to feel like this area is looked after and kind of has life growing from it, and it kind of just separated the desert atmosphere with the cacti and things like that. So I kind of tried to get the balance between the two, but I did want to have this kind of bright atmosphere, especially to link with the floral archways we got in the star path, because they are very kind of colourful and bright. I wanted to kind of link that up, so I did add some beach grass and some sunlit plateau grass around to kind of just fill in those gaps and make it look overgrown but brimming with life. Now in this kind of recreational area, I didn't use too much foliage throughout. I kind of obviously lined the border of it with foliage to kind of cut it off from the rock behind it and kind of cover that over. But for the most part, I left most of it pretty blank. I did add in some random little rock spots just to bring a bit more texture to the flooring, because there was this big empty gap in the middle, so the rock spots and the kind of loose grass really broke that up. But I didn't want to put any big furniture items in this gap because I wanted it to feel like you were coming into this kind of vast open area with all the different things going around the side. And then I went in and kind of rearranged where everything was before I was ready to kind of be happy with everything and where it was lined up. I then went in with, you guessed it, melted candles. It's not a build without melted candles, but I went in and I added loads of those around. I actually added a lot more than I usually do in my builds, purely because I wanted this biome to feel very old school. I didn't want to use any kind of proper lampposts. I wanted it to feel as though everything was done by candlelight. So all the lighting I used in here was either kind of the big lamppost with the candles, or they were melted candles dotted about for lighting. Obviously it means that during night and things like that, this biome is pretty dark. However, I wanted that look of everything being by candlelight, very rustic, very kind of ancient, I guess. And that was kind of my thought behind that. Obviously during nighttime it is kind of hard to see, but because I tend to play the game with the time either set to daytime or sunset, I don't really worry too much about that, and I kind of wanted that look of it being very old school. So I added a lot more melted candles than I usually do, but I also went in and kind of made sure all the lighting was kind of dotted around with these warm lights. So that is the final build, so I will take you across from the bridge. So the first bit we have is just this little seating area, some flowers and a little zen garden. I just felt like it worked well in here. And then our exit out to the jungle. Then on our left we have our little rec area, so we have this cute little pillow set up from the Bell bundle. And then we have our table with all kind of our astrological and educational stuff on. I feel like I'm glad I went for this rather than food. Then in this corner, my inspiration behind it was that people would stand here and paint royalty. And you know when you see in old school films they would have people lounge here and eat grapes and things like that. That was my thought behind that. We then get to the main courtyard, which we can see is obviously very majestic, very royal, and has got these two thrones on either side, which I just felt fit really well, and they kind of have books and a globe and things like that around them to kind of bring in that kind of ancient educational look. And then the seating area, I just did it in this little kind of circular shape, so it's kind of like you go in and everyone can sit in there. Then as we head down the hidden rock spot to the right, we obviously have two statues. We have the Maui one as well as the new one from the premium shop set, and a little bench just to sit on, just to kind of have this hidden little statue area on the right. As we run around to the left, we obviously just have some foliage, and then we go through the secret little entrance through the archway, which I really like. We then have our exit to the kind of secret underground area, and then we have our other section with two statues and also a little telescope, which I felt worked really well in the biome, and it was kind of the best spot for it. So that is the final build. I did take the photos during daytime just because I felt like the colours popped really well in here, and I just think it looked really, really cute. So I kind of went around and just took photos of how everything is looking. I'm actually very happy with how this build turned out. I wasn't sure going into it if it would work in here, and I didn't know if it would work in the dunes with kind of the sandy ground. I was really questioning it halfway through. I was like, have I made the right choice? But I actually am really glad with how it turned out. I think making it that bit more overgrown just gave it the kind of colour and the character to kind of lighten it up. I think the use of the ancient trees really broke the desert theme apart, and I'm just really happy with how this spot turned out. And now my dunes are completely done. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and it gave you some inspiration of how to use this premium set. If you haven't picked it up yet, I would highly recommend it. It is really good value for what you get for the amount of moonstones it is. But if you are short and it's something you don't think you'll use, then obviously maybe pass on it. But I personally would recommend it very much, and I really enjoyed building with it. I hope you guys enjoyed too. Let me know down below what you think of the build and anything I could change or tweak. And I hope to see you in the next one. Have a lovely week. Bye.